Hey man, when a woman hurts you, whether through disrespect, betrayal, mixed signals, or emotional games, the worst thing you can do is react from the same wounded place she pushed you into. Most men get trapped because they respond in the moment, not from their center. They chase clarity. They beg for explanations. They try to fix the situation before they've even processed what they feel. But the truth is, the way you handle a woman who hurts you determines the dynamic for the rest of the connection. A woman studies your reaction to pain more than anything else. She watches whether you crumble or stay grounded, whether you get emotional or composed, whether you try to win her or walk away without drama. And when she sees strength instead of chaos, calm instead of desperation, boundaries instead of pleading, that's when everything begins to shift. Not because she respects the hurt she caused, but because she finally sees a man who doesn't lose himself, trying to hold on to someone who wounded him. The first step in dealing with a woman who hurts you is emotional separation. Not silence used as a manipulation tactic, but silence used for clarity. You can't see the situation clearly when you're still bleeding from the wound she inflicted. You need distance to understand what really happened, what she meant by it, and whether it was intentional or just the result of her emotional instability. Without emotional distance, you will misread her actions, overreact, or internalize the hurt in a way that affects your self-worth. So step back. Stop trying to fix what you don't fully understand yet. Let the emotional dust settle. Because once you step outside the intensity of the moment, you'll see the truth more clearly. Not the story she creates, not the excuses she offers, but the reality of whether her behavior reflects who she truly is. When a woman hurts you, a part of you will want her to acknowledge what she did, apologize, or show remorse. And there's nothing wrong with wanting that. It's human. But waiting for her to validate your pain gives her power she doesn't deserve. If she takes responsibility, good. If she doesn't, that's your answer. A woman who truly values you won't let her ego ruin the connection. But a woman who can't acknowledge your hurt is revealing a painful truth. She didn't care enough to protect what you felt in the first place. So don't chase an apology. Don't argue your pain. Don't beg her to understand. Her response or lack of response already tells you everything about her emotional capacity. And once you see that clearly, it becomes easier to handle her from a place of grounded strength rather than wounded attachment. A woman's emotional patterns reveal more about her intentions than her words ever will. If she hurts you and then acts as if nothing happened, or tries to shift the blame onto you, or accuses you of overreacting, that's not just immaturity, that's emotional manipulation. Women do this when they fear accountability, when they rely on your attachment to avoid consequences, or when they know your heart is too soft to walk away. But once she realizes you're not controlled by her emotional temperature anymore, her behavior changes instantly. She becomes more aware of her tone. She becomes more careful with her words. She becomes more respectful of your boundaries, because a man who stops arguing and starts observing is a man who becomes impossible to manipulate. Handling a woman who hurts you requires a shift in power, not through force, dominance, or threats, but through grounded detachment. When you stop reacting emotionally, she loses the ability to influence your inner world. When you stop seeking reassurance, she sees you're no longer dependent on her approval. When you stop fighting the pain, she realizes you've stepped into a place she can't reach, a place of clarity. That shift scares her more than anger or confrontation ever could. Anger tells her you're still emotionally invested. Silence tells her you've stepped outside her emotional grip. And the moment she senses that emotional distance, her entire approach changes. She becomes more cautious, more aware, and more honest because she finally feels the consequences of her actions. One of the strongest things you can do when a woman hurts you is to stop explaining your value. Stop reminding her how loyal you were. Stop telling her how much effort you put in. Stop trying to make her see what she's risking. Because the moment you try to convince someone of your worth, you hand them the power to decide it for you. Instead, let your silence communicate what words cannot. Let your absence convey the respect you feel for yourself. Let your withdrawal show her that your patience isn't infinite, your love isn't blind, and your spirit isn't something she can damage without consequence. A woman understands the value of a man most clearly when she feels the weight of his absence, not the sound of his arguments. Handling a woman who hurts you isn't about revenge or teaching her a lesson. It's about protecting your emotional space. Some women hurt you out of immaturity, some out of insecurity, some out of confusion, but the intention doesn't matter as much as the pattern. If she hurts you once and shows genuine remorse, that's one thing. If she hurts you repeatedly and expects you to endure it, that's who she is. And the most powerful thing you can do in that situation is recognize the difference. A woman who truly values you will correct herself. A woman who doesn't will expect you to adjust to her dysfunction, and how you handle her determines whether you reinforce her behavior or rise above it. You must understand something crucial. A woman only respects boundaries she feels. Verbal boundaries mean nothing to her if your actions contradict them. If she hurts you and you respond with begging, chasing, or emotional breakdowns, she learns nothing. She sees you as a man she can wound without consequence. But if she hurts you and you respond by stepping back, becoming calmer, and focusing on yourself, she feels the shift. She feels the distance. She feels the lack of access. And that feeling creates accountability more effectively than any argument ever could. Women don't learn from explanations, they learn from changes in your energy. When you handle a woman who hurts you from a place of calm strength, you reclaim your emotional sovereignty. You send a message, not through words, but through presence, that you are not a man who allows emotional chaos in his life. You're not a man who tolerates disrespect, even when it comes from someone he cares about. You're not a man who bends for someone who breaks him. This energy doesn't make you cold, it makes you powerful, and women respond to that power. Even the woman who hurt you will suddenly approach you differently. She will speak softer, she will listen more, she will watch her tone, because she senses she's dealing with a man who is no longer influenced by her emotional storms. And finally, the most important part of handling a woman who hurts you is knowing when to walk away, not as a threat, not as a performance, but as a form of self-respect. Women can sense when a man stays out of fear of losing her. They can smell that insecurity, but they also sense when a man leaves because he refuses to betray himself by staying. And that kind of exit changes everything. It forces her to confront her own behavior. It forces her to see the role she played. It forces her to realize the difference between a man who was attached and a man who outgrew the pain she caused. And once she sees that, once she sees you didn't leave out of weakness, but out of strength, her respect for you becomes permanent, whether she admits it or not. When a woman hurts you, the instinct most men have is to seek closure from her, to ask why she did it, what she meant, whether she still cares, whether the connection can be repaired. But the truth is harsh. The woman who hurts you rarely gives you the closure you want, not because she doesn't know what she did, but because giving you clarity forces her to face the part of herself she doesn't want to see. Women avoid accountability, not out of malice, but out of discomfort. They don't like being confronted with the reality that they caused harm. So if you chase answers, you end up chasing a version of her that doesn't exist, the version that understands, admits, and heals. Instead, the real closure you need comes from stepping back long enough to see that her actions were already your answer. What she did speaks louder than what she'll ever explain. Handling a woman who hurts you requires you to become emotionally non-reactive, not emotionally numb. That's unhealthy, but emotionally steady. When she tries to explain, you listen without interrupting. When she gets defensive, you don't mirror it. When she tries to guilt trip or shift blame, you stay centered. This calmness forces her to confront the truth without the distraction of your emotional outbursts. A woman can dismiss your anger easily. She'll label it as overreaction. She can dismiss your pain. She'll call it sensitivity. But she cannot dismiss your calmness. Silence and composure force her to see herself clearly. And this is where your power lies. Not in trying to control her, but in controlling your reaction so thoroughly that her manipulation loses its effect. Women are emotional creatures, but emotional doesn't mean innocent. A woman who hurts you often knows exactly where your weaknesses are. She knows what will make you spiral, what will trigger you, what will pull you closer, what will make you question your worth. And when you react emotionally, you confirm the control she has over you. But when you stay grounded, you break the cycle. You show her that you're not a man who can be emotionally twisted, shaped, or pulled by her instability. This is the moment she sees something she didn't expect. A man who can feel deeply, yet remain unshaken. That combination is rare, and it changes the way she treats you going forward. When you stop giving emotional oxygen to the pain she caused, you create an environment where she has to face herself. Women understand emotional consequences more than verbal ones. When she sees you become quieter, more focused on yourself, less available, less emotionally open, she feels the weight of her actions in a way that lectures or arguments could never achieve. She begins to sense that something shifted, something she didn't anticipate. She realizes she crossed the line, and most importantly, she sees that you're not punishing her, you're protecting yourself. That distinction matters because a man who punishes her is still tied to her emotionally, but a man who protects himself has already stepped into a higher version of his own value. The moment you stop trying to convince her of your worth, she begins to see it on her own. When she hurts you, she expects you to fight for the connection, to reassure her, to seek closeness, to chase after the closure she withholds. But when you don't do that, when you don't fall apart, when you don't plead, when you don't lose yourself, her perception of you changes completely. She begins treating you like someone she underestimated. She becomes more cautious. She becomes more respectful. She becomes more aware of her words and actions, because now she senses something she didn't expect. You're a man who has boundaries. You're a man who isn't afraid to lose her. You're a man who values his emotional peace over temporary connection, and women treat that type of man with a seriousness they never showed when he was emotionally vulnerable. You must understand something deeply. A woman does not respect pain, she respects composure. When she sees you suffer openly, she might feel guilty or sympathetic for a moment, but it doesn't change her behavior long term. Pain doesn't make her treat you better, it often makes her lose attraction. But when she sees you handle hurt with discipline, when you stay calm, grounded, focused, improving yourself quietly, that's when her entire perception shifts. Because now, instead of seeing you as someone emotionally dependent on her, she sees you as someone emotionally sovereign, and a sovereign man cannot be controlled, manipulated, or diminished. That is the version of you she respects the most. The truth is, you cannot handle a woman who hurts you by trying to fix her. That's the trap men fall into. They believe that if they love her enough, teach her enough, guide her enough, she'll stop causing pain. But pain caused by immaturity or emotional instability cannot be fixed by your patience. It requires her self-awareness, something no man can force into a woman. Your responsibility is not to heal her, but to protect yourself. Because the woman who hurts you today will hurt you again tomorrow if she doesn't confront her own patterns. And the only thing that makes her confront them is the experience of losing access to a man she didn't believe she could lose. If you want to handle her from a place of strength, you must stop rewarding her with your attention after she wounds you. Attention is currency for women. Validation is fuel. Emotional engagement, even negative engagement, gives her power. When she sees that hurting you still keeps you emotionally involved, she learns nothing. But when she hurts you and your energy becomes unavailable, not out of spite but out of self-respect, she's forced to face the emptiness that follows. That emptiness is what teaches her the lesson your words never could. She realizes that losing your emotional presence is far more painful than any argument or confrontation. One of the most powerful ways to handle a woman who hurts you is to focus on becoming better instead of becoming bitter. Pain has a way of transforming men. It can either destroy you or rebuild you. And when you choose growth instead of resentment, you step into a version of yourself that women don't just respect, they fear losing. Your silence becomes discipline. Your withdrawal becomes alignment. Your lack of emotional reactivity becomes strength. And when she sees that you use the pain she caused as fuel instead of a prison, her behavior toward you shifts instantly because she finally sees the truth. She didn't break you. She contributed to the man who rose above her. And finally, handling a woman who hurts you requires one brutal kind of honesty, asking yourself whether she belongs in your life at all. Not every woman who hurts you is evil. Some are just emotionally unprepared, lost, impulsive, or broken in ways they haven't healed, but the impact on you is the same. And if you don't protect yourself, you'll keep trying to fix someone who was never your responsibility. The most powerful move you can make is to choose yourself over the connection, to walk away from the chaos she brings, to honor your own heart before hers. Because the moment you decide that your peace matters more than her presence is the moment you become the kind of man no woman can hurt twice. There comes a moment when a woman who hurt you begins to sense that you're no longer responding to her the way you used to, and that moment changes everything about how she behaves. When she sees you no longer rushing to fix misunderstandings, no longer defending yourself against her accusations, no longer offering emotional comfort after she caused the pain, she realizes something shifted inside you. That realization forces her into a place she isn't comfortable with, awareness. She becomes aware that her words don't hit you the same way, aware that her moods don't influence your behavior, aware that her distance doesn't trigger panic in you. And because she senses that emotional shift, she treats you with a caution and seriousness she never showed before. Not because she's suddenly mature, but because she's finally realizing she can't rely on your attachment to shield her from the consequences of her behavior. When a woman hurts you, what she expects is emotional noise, arguments, long explanations, angry texts, pleading, attempts to make her understand. But when you don't give her that, her entire emotional script breaks. She doesn't know what to do with a man who doesn't react. She doesn't know how to navigate a situation where her actions don't create the emotional response she predicted, and that confusion forces her into reflection, even if she's not ready to admit it. She begins replaying what she said, what she did, how she behaved, because your silence doesn't allow her to escape into justification. When you're calm, she has to face herself. She has to confront what she normally avoids, and that internal discomfort is what begins to shift her behavior, even if she tries to maintain her pride. The deeper truth is that women gauge a man's emotional strength based on how he handles pain, not how he handles pleasure. Anyone can be kind, loving, and patient when things are perfect, but when she hurts you and you respond with composure instead of chaos, she sees a level of emotional discipline that very few men possess. That discipline doesn't make you distant, it makes you unshakable, and women respond to unshakable men differently. She becomes more respectful with her tone, she becomes more mindful of her choices, she becomes more intentional with her words, because she knows she's interacting with someone who cannot be destabilized by her inconsistency. That shifts the entire power dynamic, not because you're cold, but because you've grown beyond the emotional volatility that once allowed her behavior to affect you deeply. One of the hardest things for a woman to process is seeing you unaffected by the version of her that once had the power to break you. This is why your growth becomes a silent message she can't ignore. When you're no longer triggered, no longer emotionally overwhelmed, no longer seeking reassurance or chasing connection, she senses a loss of influence. She realizes you rebuilt yourself without her. She sees you no longer depend on her validation, and that realization forces her to treat you with a level of seriousness she never extended when she knew you were emotionally invested. She becomes careful not to speak out of impulse. She becomes cautious about how much access she asks for. She becomes aware that if she crosses certain lines, there's no guarantee you'll allow her back. That's the power of healing. It changes how she must show up. Handling a woman who hurts you is also about recognizing patterns, not moments. One painful incident can be forgiven, but repeated emotional injuries reflect a deeper truth. She's operating from a level of chaos she hasn't confronted within herself. And when you continue to absorb the damage, you teach her that her instability has a home in your life. The strongest thing you can do is step outside the emotional cycle she brings. You don't correct her, you don't fix her, you don't stabilize her, you simply stop participating. You engage only when she's calm, respectful, and centered, and when she's chaotic, reactive, or hurtful, you withdraw your energy without anger or resentment. That pattern teaches her more about boundaries than any lecture, because she sees that access to you requires emotional maturity, not emotional force. A man who handles a woman's hurtful behavior with clarity instead of chaos becomes the kind of man she remembers long after the connection ends, not because of ego or nostalgia, but because of contrast. In a world where most men argue, chase, and break down under emotional pressure, the man who remains stable becomes unforgettable. Women don't forget the man they couldn't emotionally unbalance. They don't forget the man whose silence required them to confront their flaws. They don't forget the man who walked away with dignity instead of drama. That kind of strength leaves an imprint, not because she regrets losing you, but because she recognizes she wasn't ready for a man who refused to let her emotional storms redefine his identity. When a woman hurts you, don't try to correct her behavior with emotional lectures. Women don't change because of explanations, they change because the environment shifts. If you beg, she feels powerful. If you argue, she feels justified. If you react, she feels in control. But if you calmly reclaim your space, you remove the emotional battlefield she relies on. You deny her the dynamic that allowed the hurt to repeat. Suddenly, she has to face herself. Suddenly, she has to adjust her tone. Suddenly, she has to consider your perspective. Because when you stop playing the emotional role she assigned you, she has no choice but to rewrite her script. And in that rewriting, she's forced to see the difference between a man she can lose and a man she cannot manipulate. Handling a woman who hurts you also means facing an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the pain you feel isn't just about what she did, but about what it revealed about you. The parts of yourself that seek validation, crave closeness, or tolerate disrespect out of fear of losing someone. When you step back and observe the situation without emotion, you begin to see that her behavior was only a reflection of where your boundaries were too soft, and instead of resenting her, you grow, you strengthen, you recalibrate, you learn that pain isn't a punishment, it's a mirror. And when you use that mirror to evolve, you handle her from a place of wisdom instead of woundedness. That evolution shows her something unparalleled. The man she hurt is not the man she's dealing with now. There's a moment in this process when she begins to sense that you're no longer trying to repair the connection, you're trying to repair yourself, and that shift hits her far deeper than anything you could say. Women can feel when a man redirects his emotional energy inward. When you start investing in your body, your goals, your vision, your peace, she senses it. When you stop seeking emotional reassurance from her and start grounding yourself, she senses it. When you stop treating her as the emotional center of your life, she senses it. When you stop treating her as the emotional center of your life, she senses it. And that awareness forces her to treat you with a new level of respect, because now she sees a man who is whole without her, and that kind of man handles pain in ways that elevate him beyond her emotional reach. And finally, the way you handle a woman who hurts you becomes a statement about your values as a man. You don't allow her behavior to turn you bitter. You don't let her disrespect define your worth. You don't let her instability rewrite your identity. Instead, you rise above the pain with discipline, clarity, and emotional sovereignty. You show her, without force, without anger, without theatrics, that your heart is valuable, your presence is valuable, your attention is valuable, and if she cannot treat those things with respect, she loses access to them. Not because you're punishing her, but because you're evolving, and the man you're becoming refuses to stay in environments where his peace is the price. That is how you handle a woman who hurts you, by becoming the man she can wound once, but never twice. There comes a point, brother, where your transformation becomes impossible for her to ignore. She can feel it before she fully understands it. The way your presence no longer leans toward her, the way your tone no longer carries old softness, the way your eyes don't search for emotional cues the way they used to. And when she feels that shift, her behavior changes in a very distinct way. She becomes more careful, not because she fears losing you. She already did, but because she fears facing the version of herself reflected in your growth. When you rise after being hurt, you force her to confront how she acted at her lowest. Your strength becomes a mirror she wasn't ready to look into. And because she senses that, she approaches you with a different level of caution, a different level of humility, a different awareness of the gap that now exists between the man she injured and the man standing in front of her. Handling a woman who hurt you requires an internal shift. You stop seeing her actions as a personal attack and start seeing them as a revelation of what she was emotionally capable of at the time. Instead of internalizing the pain, you begin to understand that her behavior came from her unresolved wounds, her insecurities, her immaturity, or her fear. When this understanding settles in, your energy toward her changes. You no longer hold resentment because you no longer personalize the injury. You begin treating her the way you treat someone who lacks the emotional tools to protect others, with distance, with clarity, with boundaries. This shift doesn't excuse her behavior, but it liberates you from carrying it. You stop expecting her to give what she never had the capacity to give, and in that moment, she senses a version of you she can't influence anymore. When a woman realizes you're no longer emotionally available to her, even in the smallest ways, she begins paying attention to your energy more than your words. She watches how you react in group settings. She observes how you carry yourself in silence. She studies how quickly you move on from emotional tension. She notices the tone you use with her compared to others, and through these observations, she sees the truth. You no longer hold space for her in your emotional world. This realization doesn't just change the way she treats you, it changes the way she sees herself. Because a woman always feels the loss of the emotional version of a man before she feels the loss of the physical version. And your emotional withdrawal becomes the quiet reminder of the line she crossed. One of the biggest shifts you'll notice is that she stops challenging you. When you are emotionally attached, she may have pushed your buttons, argued over small things, created unnecessary drama, or tested your patience. But when she senses that her behavior no longer affects you, her willingness to challenge you disappears. She doesn't pick fights, she doesn't provoke emotional responses, she doesn't try to pull reactions out of you, because she realizes that provoking you now doesn't give her control, it exposes her. And she knows she no longer has the emotional leverage she once enjoyed. This change is not submission, it's surrender. She's surrendering to the reality that she can no longer treat you with emotional recklessness. There's another shift too. she becomes more truthful, not out of loyalty, but out of guilt. A woman who hurt you, but sees you rise above it, often feels compelled to be more honest than she ever was during the relationship. She may clarify things she withheld. She may reveal insecurities she hid. She may admit fears she never shared. This honesty isn't meant to fix anything. It's her attempt to relieve the internal pressure of knowing she didn't treat you fairly. She doesn't want to carry the burden of the villain in your story, and her honesty becomes a way to correct the version of herself she showed you. You don't reward this honesty with closeness, you receive it with maturity. Because now you understand that truth was never missing, courage was. As you continue evolving, she becomes more emotionally cautious around you. Not fearful, but aware of how she speaks, aware of the respect in her tone, aware of the boundaries she once ignored. She begins to match your energy instead of demanding that you match hers. And this shift happens because she knows you no longer operate from emotional dependency. She sees you're not seeking reassurance, validation, or approval. She sees you're not trying to fix the connection. She sees you're not questioning your worth. And this awareness forces her into emotional alignment, because she recognizes that the man in front of her isn't the man she once had the ability to hurt. He's the man who learned from the pain and built himself on the other side of it. Handling a woman who hurt you also means refusing to step back into the emotional role she once assigned you. She may try to recreate old dynamics through nostalgia, familiarity, shared memories, or subtle emotional hooks. She may reach for the version of you who cared too quickly, forgave too easily, or explained himself too much. But when you refuse to return to that role, she realizes something crucial. The emotional script she wrote doesn't apply to you anymore. You've rewritten yourself. You've rewritten how you love. You've rewritten how you respond. You've rewritten what you tolerate. And this forces her to treat you with a respect she didn't offer when she believed you'd always remain predictable. Your unpredictability is not chaos, it's growth. There's also a moment where she begins holding back certain emotions around you, not because she doesn't feel them, but because she's afraid of how they'll be received. She may want closeness but hold back. She may want to apologize but hesitate. She may want to express regret but fear. You'll interpret it as manipulation. And this restraint comes from the realization that she no longer understands your emotional world. She used to know how you'd react. She used to know how to pull you closer. She used to know how to soften you. But now that she no longer has that certainty, she becomes cautious with her vulnerability. And that caution is proof of how profoundly you've changed the dynamic. As you maintain your composure and your boundaries, she begins trying to meet you at the emotional level she once failed to reach. She becomes more consistent, more considerate, more responsible with her words, more self-aware in her tone. This isn't an attempt to rekindle what was lost. It's an attempt to respect the man you've become. She senses she's interacting with someone who values himself deeply, someone who honors his emotions, someone who does not let love blind him to disrespect. And that recognition forces her into emotional growth, whether she likes it or not. Not for you, but because your evolution exposed the parts of herself she ignored. And finally, brother, the deepest shift happens when she realizes you healed without turning cold. You didn't become bitter. You didn't become resentful. You didn't become emotionally unavailable. You simply became wiser. You became more selective. You became harder to destabilize. And that level of emotional maturity changes the way she treats you permanently. She no longer approaches you casually. She no longer plays with your emotions. She no longer assumes access. Instead, she treats you like a man she respects, truly respects, because you handled the pain she caused with more strength, more dignity, and more clarity than she expected. And that's the moment she understands something she'll never say aloud. She didn't just hurt a man, she helped build one. When she realizes she no longer has access to the emotional version of you she once influenced, something shifts in her presence. She becomes noticeably more grounded around you. A woman who used to speak quickly now thinks before she opens her mouth. A woman who used to challenge you now aligns herself with your tone. A woman who used to dismiss your feelings now pays attention to the smallest changes in your energy. Her entire demeanor becomes more measured because she senses that the margin for disrespect no longer exists. She's dealing with a man who rebuilt himself after being wounded, and she knows men who survive their own heartbreak become the most dangerous, not to others, but to their own past patterns, and she treats you like someone who has stepped beyond the version of himself she once hurt. Handling a woman who hurt you becomes easier when you realize she's often more afraid of repeating her mistakes than you are of experiencing them again. Once she sees the strength you built after the pain, she becomes cautious, not out of fear of losing you, but out of fear of losing the privilege of interacting with you at all. She knows you won't tolerate confusion, chaos, or emotional irresponsibility. She knows your silence now carries a weight it didn't before. She knows your distance isn't a punishment, it's a principle. And because she understands that, she adjusts her behavior accordingly. She becomes more intentional, more respectful, more self-aware. Not because she wants to win you back, but because she recognizes the strength it took for you to stay dignified instead of retaliating. One of the most profound changes happens when she begins measuring her words around you. She avoids exaggeration. She avoids emotional manipulation. She avoids playing the victim because your emotional elevation forces her to stay in reality. She knows you no longer react to emotional theatrics. She knows that guilt, pressure, and indirect communication won't move you. She knows she can't rely on the same emotional shortcuts she used in the past, so she becomes more straightforward. She speaks with clarity. She avoids unnecessary drama. This shift is not accidental, it's a response to your upgraded emotional standard. You grew out of the fantasy she operated from, and now she must interact with the man who refuses to live in illusion. As she continues observing your transformation, she begins to realize something she didn't see before. The pain she gave you didn't break you, it refined you. And this realization changes the way she perceives you forever. She sees you as someone who has mastered his emotional reactions, someone who rebuilt himself quietly, someone who strengthened his mind without needing validation. She begins treating you with the subtle reverence people reserve for those who evolve through suffering instead of collapsing under it. You become the standard she measures other men against, not because she wants you back, but because she now understands how rare emotional maturity is in men, and she learns it through you. There's another shift that happens. She becomes more honest with herself, even if she never says it out loud. She knows the pain she caused contributed to your growth, but she also knows it cost her something she didn't value at the time: access to the man you are now. And this internal realization softens her. It humbles her. It makes her approach conversations with more sincerity. She doesn't want to be remembered as the woman who left a scar. She wants to be remembered as the woman who helped shape you, even if she played that role accidentally. So she treats you with a quiet respect, because respecting you now is her way of honoring the growth you achieved without her. When a woman sees you've healed and matured without closing your heart, her behavior becomes more consistent. She doesn't disappear randomly. She doesn't create emotional uncertainty. She doesn't play with boundaries, because she sees you're not the man who tolerates inconsistency. You treat yourself with too much respect now, and that forces her to treat you the same way. She mirrors your steadiness. She mirrors your patience. She mirrors your calmness. Even her flaws soften around you, not because she's changed completely, but because your energy doesn't allow emotional chaos to survive. Your presence alone becomes a reminder of the standard she failed to meet before. Another shift appears in how she approaches vulnerability. She becomes more open than she ever was when she believed she had you. She might share insecurities, past traumas, or regrets she once hid. This openness isn't an attempt to win you back. It's her way of releasing the emotional weight she carried after hurting you. Women don't apologize the way men expect. Their apology often comes in the form of vulnerability. And when you sit in front of her as a calm, centered man, she feels safe enough to show parts of herself she kept guarded when she was operating from ego. This vulnerability is her way of acknowledging her wrongdoing without saying it directly. By this stage, she treats you like someone she wants to be on good terms with, not because she's angling for a second chance, but because she recognizes the value of having you in her life, even at a distance. She may never ask for forgiveness, but she acts forgiven. She behaves respectfully. She avoids stepping on emotional landmines. She doesn't want history to repeat itself. She doesn't want to be the source of pain in your life anymore. Your growth became her guide, the blueprint for how she must interact with you if she wants to maintain even the slightest connection. And this shift is proof of something powerful. Your healing changed her behavior more than your arguments ever could. She also becomes protective of your peace in a way she wasn't before. She won't burden you with unnecessary drama. She won't pull you into unstable situations. She won't ask for emotional labor she knows she doesn't deserve. Even if she still feels drawn to you, she's aware that her presence must align with your new standard of stability. This is one of the clearest signs that a woman's perception of you has matured. She stops acting entitled to your emotional resources. She begins treating your time, your boundaries, and your life with gratitude instead of expectation. And this is the respect that comes not from love, but from growth. And finally, brother, when you've handled a woman who hurt you in the right way, with clarity, calmness, and emotional sovereignty, she treats the new version of you with a depth of respect she didn't know how to offer before. She sees you as a man who rose without resentment, who healed without becoming cold, who kept his humanity while building unshakable boundaries. She knows deep down she'll never be able to hurt you again, not because she wouldn't try, but because you've evolved into a man who cannot be destabilized by someone else's emotional chaos. And that is the ultimate transformation. The pain she caused no longer defines you, the strength you built afterward does. And she treats you accordingly, not with fear, not with regret, but with the quiet acknowledgement that she met you too early, hurt you too quickly, and lost you too easily.